Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Cover to Cover, Profiling Predatory Publishing, which is sponsored by Cabells. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Now, I'll just put some links in the chat to where you can register for upcoming webinars or watch previous webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are turned off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers or to share any comments. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. We do anticipate a lot of questions, so if we don't get to yours, we apologize in advance for that, but we'll still do our best to answer as many questions as we have time for. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button in the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version and where to access the slides. And with that, we are ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Mike.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Bisaccio, Director of Marketing and Communications with Cabells. We're very happy to be here with you today. Thanks for joining us. We're going to discuss a very important topic for everyone in the academic and medical and publishing communities to be aware of. We're going to start off with a couple of poll questions for everyone attending. If you'd like to take a moment to answer, it will give us a nice idea of everyone's experience or hopefully lack thereof, with predatory publishers. So just to start off initially with a bit about Cabells, in case you're not familiar with us, journals are our entire focus. We're committed to helping researchers and librarians identify quality journals that will maximize the impact of their work and to avoid what have been termed predatory journals, which we will examine further today. Cabells began in 1978 as a print directory with business journal contact information and has grown into and evolved into the platforms we have today, full of key information and metrics on thousands of journals. Our goal is to protect research and research integrity by helping the community make smarter publishing decisions, in part through sessions such as this one. Now, I'm happy to throw it over to our journal experts so they can take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yasmin Zubair, and I am the journal manager at Cabells. I manage the journal's auditing team and the journal updating process of our databases, and I guide content decisions as well.
Hi, I'm Ruth Bailey. I'm a journal auditor at Cabells. I'm responsible for assessing titles for potential inclusion in the Predatory Reports database. I also update journals that are listed in Journalytics and also assess new titles for inclusion.
And hello, my name is Ashley Carroll. I'm the project manager for Cabells, and I primarily work with our journals and marketing teams to promote community engagement and brand recognition. All right, so I'll be starting us off today. First, I want to go over what we'll be covering in today's webinar. And I'll start us off with defining what predatory publishing is and its impacts. And then Yasmin will discuss how Cabells profiles predatory journals. And from there, Ruth and Yasmin will discuss 4 profiles that we've created to identify predatory publishing. And then Mike will walk us through various ways researchers can avoid predatory pitfalls along their publishing journeys. And then I'll finish up with some resources and ideas for librarians. And then we will give you a few resources from the web and from Cabells that may be helpful to you. And then we'll finish up with taking your questions. And if you can't already see, the answers to the poll questions have already posted. So it seems that the majority of you do not know or have not been the victim of predatory publishing. And I would say a little over half of you feel pretty comfortable identifying predatory publishing behaviors. So hopefully you will still be able to glean some information from this presentation. Okay, so let's talk about what predatory publishing is, how it works, what impacts it's having on academia and authorship, and what's being done about it. So it can be challenging to define predatory publishing because each instance of predatory publishing is often nuanced. But what we know and what we've observed is that predatory publishing is a form of deceptive publishing, usually stemming from the desire to deceive authors who need to publish while they, the publishers, profit monetarily. The financial profit is most often the driving factor in nearly every case that we've encountered. For example, predatory journals charge fees for publication and/or submission of articles, and sometimes there are other hidden fees that the author won't learn about until after they've submitted their paper. In return for the fees, the journals promise peer review and editorial sources or services. However, most predatory journals do not actually follow through with these promises of services. Predatory journals typically do not care about the quality of their journals, and they often fail to meet industry standards when it comes to publishing. And to really drive this point home, in 2023, it was reported by an article in Nature that more than 10,000 research papers have been retracted due to sham papers and peer review fraud. Also, in many cases that we've observed, editorial boards are completely faked, or they're comprised of people without their permission or the proper expertise in their fields. And it should be noted at this point that identifying predatory journals requires a holistic analysis of multiple behaviors, including the ones that I've just covered, of which Ruth and Yasmin will discuss later and more in depth. The impacts of predatory publishing are far-reaching, and predatory journals really paved the way for poor quality papers to be published and disseminated, as well as potentially causing the spread of scientific and medical misinformation. An author and institution's reputation and credibility could potentially be damaged if discovered, and really that's just the tip of the iceberg. In a global survey conducted in 2022 by some researchers at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, at least 24% of more than 1,800 researchers and respondents admitted they had already published in a predatory journal, or that they'd participated in a predatory conference, or they didn't even know if they had. And over 87% of respondents who had published or participated in this survey indicated that a lack of awareness of predatory practices was their main reason for doing so. It's also worth noting that in a 2023 Pew Research Center study on Americans' trust in scientists and science decline, the share expressing the strongest level of trust in scientists, saying that they have a great deal of confidence in them, has fallen from 39% in 2020 to 23% today. And so roughly a quarter of Americans now say that they have not much or no confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interests, which is actually up from 12% in 2020. At a time when public mistrust in science and medical research is at an all-time high, now is really not the time to ignore predatory publishing, which is why we're so glad that you are here. But unfortunately, there is no central authority that monitors predatory publishing. However, there are multiple agencies such as COPE, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics, and Cabells, that have taken multi-step approaches to help combat the ever-growing issue and spread of predatory publishing. And now I will pass it over to Yasmin.
So how do we find these predatory journals? Cabells is often tipped off by academics in the field, usually by email, about suspicious journals. And so some of the best information comes from researchers encountering suspicious journals during the course of their own research. Our team also scans media reports, discourse on social media, publisher press releases, and paper retractions. Additionally, we consider lists by the National Science Library of the Chinese Academy for Sciences, for example. So altogether, we have many avenues for discovering these journals. Our procedure involves forming a thorough picture of the journal. We analyze the journal's peer review policies and editorial practices, and we read through selected papers to see the quality level of the work that the journal deems acceptable for publication. And at this stage, issues with peer review can become more clear. Next, we assess journals against the Cabells criteria, which are aligned with industry standards, and they're developed to be holistic and balanced. We really don't want to penalize journals based on perceived quality, but instead on assessed intent. So we need to closely examine the journal to make sure that there's an actual intent to deceive. Now, this can be tricky, and so it's important to be objective and verify everything we can. A journal may be considered predatory based on how much evidence we find of predatory behavior and how severe the violations are. We have a ranking system for weighted criteria. So minor violations such as dead links on the site are not taken as heavily into consideration compared to moderate or severe violations, such as the author having, for example, falsified academic credentials. That's something we see regularly. So once we've completed the evaluation, if a journal crosses the threshold of acceptable behavior, then we list the journal in our database as well as the violations that we've identified. And journals can appeal afterwards. And in that case, our auditing team will review their application. The process involves the journal showing evidence that it has taken steps to correct the behaviors that we were concerned with. So overall, after doing this for years now, some patterns of behavior start to become noticeable, they emerge. And so that brings us to our predatory profiles. And I'm going to hand it over to Ruth.
Yeah, so a helpful way to categorize the particular behaviors we might come across when evaluating potentially predatory journals are going to be presented in the following 4 profiles. So the first profile I'm going to talk about is duplicitous details. Attention to detail is incredibly important when assessing journals for their potential predatory nature. So when we're deciding if we think a journal is predatory, we're looking for evidence of the intent to deceive. And it's often multiple smaller details that add up to make a much bigger predatory picture. We'd rarely just judge a journal just on one type of behavior. Journals are often attempting to make a potential author think that either the journal's of much higher quality than it is, that it's more well respected, or in short, that it's just something it's not. So one of the ways a journal might do this is by providing misleading metrics or statistics. So you might look at a journal website and see that it's got a really long list of indexes and databases, and they might sound really similar to respected databases in the field, but on closer inspection, you can see that they aren't the same thing at all. Journals might lie about users or numbers of downloads for the journals as well, just to enhance that picture for potential authors. Another thing journals might lie about is their actual inclusion in regular indexes such as Scopus or Clarivate Analytics, Directory of Open Access Journals, and also Cabells. Journals have to do quite a lot of work to be accepted onto indexing services. So they would need to have a really clear aim and focus, a good editorial team, a strong article pipeline, articles that are going to be cited, industry accepted policies, particularly with regard to peer review. And this is to name just a few criteria. Different indexing services and different databases require different levels from the journals. And so because of this, their inclusion is regarded by many people as a stamp of quality. So for example, if a journal falsely listed that it's got an impact factor, that it's included in Web of Science, then journals are intending to deceive because they know that this is exactly the sort of thing that some authors will be looking for. And so seeing this marker of quality or repute might then dissuade them from looking further into the journal, and they might ignore any other red flags that are existing. Similarly, journals might claim that they are included in digital preservation services such as the LOCKSS programme. So authors might get a sense of security that their article is going to be protected and that it's not just going to disappear. This is often not the case, as predatory journal websites can disappear overnight and articles can be lost forever. Another thing that these types of journals might do is align themselves with respected organisations, for example, COPE, or they might claim that they adhere to COPE guidelines, and it's quite difficult to prove that this isn't the case. And all of this is ways for the journal to attempt to give the authors a sort of false peace of mind and convince them that the journal is actually worth submitting to. Another detail we often come across, which sort of seems quite minor but is quite telling, is whether contact details are provided for the journal. Often we'll see that there's no actual physical address listed and we just get a contact us form, or the journal might list an address which is a virtual office or a residential address, and when you look more closely there isn't actually a business or organisation linked to that address. In many cases, the contact address won't actually match the location of the journal. So you might have a journal that's operating out of India, say, but it's got a business address listed in the UK and in the US. And then when we look into that address, there isn't a business actually registered there. We also find that you might have the same sort of virtual office used across a number of different predatory journals that are across different predatory publishers. So it's almost just like they've copied them from each other. And this is sometimes a way that we find new predatory titles. So if we search on an address when we're checking out one journal, it might then link to further titles that we can investigate. This again, it's just done as a way to sort of meet what they think are the author needs. A lot of authors are encouraged to publish in English language journals or in an international journal. So by just posting a fake address, then journals can attempt to meet that need. I'd say that all of these false claims are relatively easy to check. It just takes a little bit of time. So it's certainly good to get into the habit of verifying claims, especially if you're not entirely convinced about the provenance of the journal. And that leads us now on to our next profile.
Profile 2 is academic misconduct. Sometimes we receive concerned and understandably distressed emails from authors who were misled and taken advantage of. And in these cases, they submit an article to a journal and oftentimes pay an article processing fee and then never receive any further communication from the journal. And later, the author finds out that their article was stolen and published in an entirely different journal to which they never consented, which can hint at a hidden relationship between the two publications. So sometimes what we see in conjunction with this is a lack of digital preservation policies. And the reason this is a concern is because these journals can remove the articles from their site without any explanation or any accountability, which in an academic context, of course, is something very concerning. When an article is withdrawn from the scientific record, there is a process, there is a protocol to follow, retractions and expressions of concern. With predatory journals, there is no such formality in the publishing process. Sometimes a link to an article simply stops working, and this points to a lack of accountability and concern for the time and effort of these authors. So that leads us into our next observed behavior, dead links on a journal website, which is relatively minor on its own, but it does point to a lack of effort and accountability on part of the journal maintaining their site. These links may lead to basic information on the site, and in that case, it can be an indicator that the journal isn't being used or maintained regularly. Often with these types of journals, there is no way to report fraudulent or concerning behavior on the journal site. There might be missing contact information, missing emails, missing institutional information for editorial board members, and that can make it challenging to track down the people who can actually take action with respect to the reported information. And so here the intent is to publish as much as possible without taking accountability for the article quality and the information quality on the site. And back to Ruth.
Okay, so profile 3, we're calling Master of Disguise. The focus here is how the editorial board of a journal is used again to present a particular picture of a journal. So the editorial board is key to the running of a successful journal, and it's where, when we're assessing potentially predatory titles, that we regularly find evidence of journals dressing themselves up to be something that they aren't. Predatory journals can use the editorial board to present themselves as credible or attractive to authors in a number of ways. Editorial board members might be included on a journal without their actual consent. As part of our evaluation process, we will contact named editorial board members to ask how they're involved with the journal or if they know about the journal. And the replies we get often indicate or state that they've never heard of the journal, or they've not been approached, or that they have been asked to be editorial board members, but they've had little or no involvement with the actual running of the journal beyond supplying maybe a photograph and a biography. So why would journals do this? We think it's largely so that they can present a picture of having a large, well-functioning editorial board. They can make it look like they've got a lot of involvement from the academic field, and by implication, good resources for the general running of the journal. If they falsely list respected names in the academic field, then they can also inflate their profile by association with these names. We also find in predatory titles that there's often a disconnect between the size of the editorial board and the research output of the journal. For example, we might find a journal that's got up to 100 editorial board members. So at first glance, you'd think it's got a good pool of people to work on the strategy of the journal, to help with peer review. But then when you look at the research output, it might be that it's published only, say, 6 to 8 journals in the whole of the last volume. Even for well-established, well-run journals, it can be a challenge to maintain a really active and involved editorial board. So if you see a huge board, big board numbers, but a low article output, then I think it's definitely a cause for concern. On the flip side of this, very small editorial boards can also be a bit of a red flag. So even when new journals are set up, they'll have a key number of editorial board members that need people to drive the strategic direction and also just the day-to-day running of a journal. So if you see a journal that lists only an editor-in-chief, or say only 1 or 2 editorial board members, then that journal's not being transparent about how the journal's managed, who's doing the day-to-day work of the journal, or if any peer review work has been done at all. Editorial board members are sometimes listed who are fake or they've got falsified qualifications. For example, we've got one editorial board member who's prolific and appears as both an editorial board and a member, and an author across a number of different predatory journals. And this person has created a whole fake institution and accompanying website. This author regularly publishes very short articles with really long reference lists, usually made up of self-citations, and these often will then cite other predatory journals. So we do tend to see some of the same names across multiple editorial boards for predatory journals. And I think where this is a particular concern is when it's the editor-in-chief. It takes a lot of work for an academic to act as an editor-in-chief of a journal. So it's unlikely that they're going to be able to do it successfully across a wide number of journals. So we will see the same name across maybe several predatory titles. And this is particularly concerning when it's across different disciplines. So you may see anything as broad from humanities to electrical engineering to medicine. The geographical makeup of the journal is also the geographical makeup of the editorial board of the journal is also something that we'll consider in relation to other claims made by the journal. For example, if the journal has the word international in its title, or it claims to be international in its aim and scope, then we'd expect to see that geographical spread reflected both in the editorial board and in authors submitting to the journal. This often isn't the case with predatory journals, and it may be that the editorial board or the majority of the authors are from one country or specific region only, and we often find that that's the country that the journal's actually based in. So I think a key takeaway from this profile is that if you aren't sure about the status of a journal, then the editorial board is often a really good place to start. Don't be afraid to reach out to editorial board members for their take on the journal. If they're actually involved, they should be happy to talk to you about whether your research is actually right for the journal. And I think that this sort of conversation might tell you all you need to know about whether to submit to the journal or not. And that leads us on to our final profile.
Profile 4 is the peer review rogue. Sometimes we come across journals which have no peer review policy, or their policy is unusually lax, and we tend to see some strange behaviors start to emerge here. Sometimes they publish nonsensical articles or machine-generated articles, unusually short articles that would not typically be accepted in mainstream journals, and articles with egregious self-citation. Some articles have no references whatsoever, and again, that's not something you would see in articles in legitimate journals. Another common practice is to promise unusually quick peer review turnaround times, which is a massive red flag in conjunction with other predatory behaviors. These behaviors form a larger overall picture that these journals are playing fast and loose with the review process. They often charge additional fees to expedite the peer review processing time, even down to a couple of days. And their objective here is to have as large of an article output as possible to make as much money as possible. So sometimes we see hundreds of articles in a single issue, and the journal is published monthly. So the publication output may be very high. And here, the target researcher is one that perhaps has a lot of pressure on them to publish quickly. In these cases, these outlets can be very tempting because of that quick publication time. Researchers can be vulnerable to falling for these types of journals because they fulfill that niche, that need for a quick turnaround time. It's worth noting, though, that many legitimate journals offer language and editing and proofing services for an extra charge. And to be clear, that's not what we're talking about here. Those fees are not that red flag that we're talking about. Also worth noting is that for some larger publishing houses, it's possible to have a quicker turnaround time because they have the resources to do so. They have the resources to maintain a qualified staff in-house to perform peer review. But we should be careful. Care should be taken with journals that have this absurdly quick turnaround time, but also exhibit other concerning behaviors, such as lacking ethical or general policies. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
Thanks, Yasmin. Excuse me. So we've covered some of the unique profiles in predatory publishing. Now we thought we'd discuss some of the things researchers, authors can do to avoid predatory journals. Let's see if I actually, there we go. So one good thing, if you can say that about predatory publishing activity having been around for a few years now, is that there is no shortage of resources available online. Webinars such as this one, or podcasts such as the one we recorded last week, The Authority File from Choice with Bill Mickey, which will be released this week, I believe, as well as dozens and dozens of articles to help you understand what predatory journals are, and most importantly, probably how to identify and avoid them. While these operations we've discussed are actively trying to deceive researchers and authors, they also have accountability, right? And carry a responsibility. When publishing research upon which further research will build, care should be taken, as we've mentioned, and due diligence performed to ensure that a legitimate outlet is identified when selecting a journal in which to publish, or at least to submit a manuscript to. We haven't spent much time discussing researchers who knowingly publish in predatory journals, either after being approached by one, usually via an overly flattering, maybe oddly worded email that I'm sure many in attendance and probably most in academia have received, or by seeking one out, maybe as an easy avenue to publication. In some parts of the world, certainly some researchers feel they don't have much choice in the matter, in that legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate publishing opportunities are limited for them. And there's certainly a point to that. We didn't cover the, all the reasons or causes of this today. That's probably enough for another session. And we didn't really get into the flaws with this plan. The research will, if discovered to be published in a predatory journal, will not be counted towards the author's publication record or CV in terms of promotion or tenure. The work is not guaranteed to be there in the next month, much less down the road, with no expectation of functional archives with predatory publications. Even if this work is valuable and was conducted with integrity, it will be marginalized due to the fact it's likely published next to pseudoscience or AI-generated junk articles, as I saw mentioned in one of the great questions we've received. There are many pitfalls with that plan. For our part, we often work with organizations that strive to understand and highlight predatory activities. We work with the Inter-Academy Partnership. The IAP is just one of these projects. IAP is made up of more than 30,000 leading scientists, engineers, and health professionals in over 100 countries, working to advance health, science, and education goals. Their report, Combating Predatory Academic Journals and Conferences, is freely available. We collaborated in part to provide insights and data on predatory journals. Many university libraries offer openly accessible, to a point, at least guides, and they often have information on avoiding and identifying predatory journals. They'll often link to very helpful resources as well. such as these. And again, we've received some great questions. It's probably just easier to answer them live rather than type them out. But I saw several mentioned resources such as these. These are just a few of the helpful tools out there from organizations devoted to helping researchers and librarians find legitimate, verified publications. The Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, found at publicationethics.org. They do a great job of supporting the publishing community through education, discussion forums, and a wealth of resources focused on promoting ethical practices. They have a very robust website with best practices and guidelines for every area of publishing, ethics toolkits, use cases, flowcharts, and then some. A directory of open access journals at doaj.org maintains an index of OA journals, looking to increase the visibility of quality peer-reviewed journals. thinkchecksubmit.org also has tools and practical resources aimed at educating researchers and promoting research integrity. So along with considering the different profiles and behaviors we discussed today, it's also a great idea to become familiar with basically the generally accepted publishing practices and guidelines. And of course, Cabells, on the next slide, we feel is the best tool for identifying quality, legitimate publications and avoiding predatory ones. Our journalistics, academic, and medicine platforms are both backed by the protection of predatory reports, have key publication information, submission guidelines, and an array of metrics on more than 22,000 quality journals that have been hand verified by our journal teams, some of whom we've met today. Closer to the topic we've discussed today, again, our predatory reports platform has full reports on currently nearly 18,000 predatory publications. Most importantly, we have all identifying information for these journals, links to their websites, so the user can completely identify and recognize whether publication they might be considering is included in our database. Our tools are subscription-based and available at the institutional level. So typically university and medical school libraries will subscribe to our resources, or both public and private research organizations of all types and sizes. At cabells.com, we also have free resources available, including our journal selection policy for legitimate journals, along with the criteria we use to evaluate suspected predatory journals against. These are, again, useful guidelines for researchers to become familiar with, so they're better equipped to recognize quality journals on their own. Now I will throw it back to Ashley.
Thank you, Mike. Oh, skip something there. There we go. So let's talk about what librarians can do to support their research communities. As a former academic librarian myself, I know how often librarians end up being the first line of defense when it comes to stopping the spread of misinformation, particularly in digital spaces. And rightfully so, we spend a lot of time combating misinformation, both the creation and the spread of it. And now we need to include predatory publishing if we don't already. Let's talk about ways we can work toward teaching and showing our researchers how to spot it, and ultimately how to avoid it. Reference and instruction librarians can create LibGuides or research guides that directly support their liaison areas. For example, a librarian that works with the various science departments can compile a list of credible scholarly journals in those fields for both their faculty and students, as well as a list of supportive resources such as thinkchecksubmit.org or those that Mike had actually outlined. LibGuides can also be centered around how to spot predatory publishing behaviors, known predatory journals, what the library can offer their researchers, and what to do if a person thinks that they've encountered predatory publishing. I've included here a screenshot of a LibGuide that was created by the Princeton University Library. This is the landing page of that LibGuide, and it defines what, their definition of predatory publishing, and the navigation tabs on the left outline various credible tools, resources, library databases, and then also offers to set up a research consultation with a librarian, which I think is great. And the takeaway is that none of us have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to creating guides or LibGuides, as there are many excellent resources already out there. And I know that SpringShare actually compiles a list of all of their LibGuides that have ever been created ever. So you can do a search and see what content has already been created. So make it easy on yourselves and check out what's already out there. Instruction librarians might consider demoing known predatory publishing sites and what to look out for, or perhaps they could use the ACRL frameworks, research as inquiry, and authority as constructed and contextual to create class activities that confront and discuss predatory publishing. It might also be useful to reach out to your tenure and promotion committees to talk about predatory publishing, or perhaps you could send out a biannual email to faculty about predatory publishing and, relevant resources, as well as making yourself available to conduct research consultations with your researchers. And if there's a new faculty orientation meeting at the beginning of the year, it might be worth trying to get on the docket for presenting library resources and mentioning to your new faculty that they have research support for when it comes time to work toward their tenure and promotion. Overall, I really think that librarians are particularly equipped to assist their users in the critical stages of their research projects. So whether that's at the beginning, in the middle, or the end. And it's in those moments that librarians can take opportunities to educate their users and be a part of the solution. And lastly, don't give up. And so I'd now like to open up the floor to any questions that our listeners may have for us. And I know that we've answered a few in the chat already, but there may still be some that are coming in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley, and thanks, everyone. We have lots of questions, so I'm going to just jump right in. Okay, this is a question that came in kind of early on from Tim, who asked, when you say you evaluate journals based on intent to deceive, do you care about which audience the deceit is intended for? For instance, is deceit aimed at authors weighted more heavily than deceit aimed at researchers looking for the material within the journal? And I think this came in during like Yasmin and Ruth's section.
So I would say it's a combination of the two. Certainly, deceit aimed at authors is a large concern, but I think that there's a lot of overlap because if questionable articles make it into the literature and and other researchers come along and expect this work to be quality, they just assume that it is, it makes problems down the road. Definitely it's snowballs, and it calls into question the integrity of all of the work that is based off of that article. So I would say that it's that the deceit is weighted about the same because there's just so much interrelationship between how these factors play out.
Okay, great, thank you. We had a couple questions about differentiating between legitimate open access fees and predatory journal fees. So maybe you all could talk about that.
Yeah, I think so if a journal is charging article publication fees as open access journals do, and predatory journals do, then I think it's about looking at the bigger picture, so the other elements of the journal. Typically, predatory journals will often have charges that are a lot lower than other open access titles. So that can sometimes be a bit of a key indicator, but it's never, we can never judge it just on the fees. So it's always on the bigger picture. So it's fees in conjunction with the bigger picture of the journal. So things like falsified information, excuse me. So that kind of just adds up. We would never just say, oh, we can tell just by the fees. And often predatory journals might have surprise fees. So once an author's paid an article publication charge, then they might say, oh, you need to pay to do this. Or if they request to withdraw an article, they might be charged for that. But I don't think you can judge it just on the fees.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, we had another question come in, this one from Brian, who said, this is fairly complex. If legitimate work has ended up in a predatory journal and is then positively cited, we have confusion. How do we unravel this? And I think this came in during Yasmin's section, but open to all.
That is a complicated question, and that is something that researchers and faculty and really librarians too are trying to unravel. It's difficult because it does cast a negative light to some researchers' work. Definitely, they are the victims in this situation. But I think that quality work shines through, and yeah, so it's complicated. But I think that if we see things holistically, sorry, the publishing landscape is still trying to find the answer to these questions. We don't have the answers to that.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, there are several, I think maybe 3 or 4 questions about legal repercussions for predatory journals. So is that possible? Is there any legal action taken against predatory journals? Can that happen? Those were kind of the main questions popping up around that.
I can probably, oh yes, off mute. I can probably speak to that a little bit. So like Yasmin mentioned, it's kind of the whole universe. It's a, complex issue, both, for researchers whose work has unknowingly been published in a, predatory journal. And so it's just a complex situation. Legal repercussions for predatory journals would, be helpful to mitigate the issue. And really, I don't have that much data on this, but one high profile instance of this was with the predatory publisher Omics, who is, infamous, I guess you would say, in that they're a very prolific predatory publisher. We currently index over 1,000, I believe, journals, or close to 1,000 journals at least, published either by Omics or one of their subsidiaries. They, in recent years, I'm blanking on the year, but it's within the last 2-3 years, were had I believe $50 million judgment against them in a federal court, with after charges brought against them by the Federal Trade Commission for basically predatory practices. There's a whole, the documentation, the briefs or whatever you would call the legal documents are available, and it kind of enumerates their practices. And again, that's another useful bit of information to become familiar with. They also operated or claim to operate predatory conferences, which is something I saw mentioned in the questions. Those are another huge problem for academia. So due to their just huge operation, again, in both publishing journals and running predatory conferences, they were kind of taken to task a bit, to the tune of $50 million. So that, you know, I'm sure, did some, progress towards maybe curtailing some of their efforts, or at least, I don't know, making them rethink things. But we have not, again, as evidenced by we're currently listing over 18,000 publications, we have not seen that have any kind of, unfortunately, wide-ranging effects on predatory publishing as a whole. But there are, now again, this was a very extreme case in Omics's case, with ample evidence and just years of evidence to build a case. And so it was, hopefully, I think they were trying to make an example out of probably the largest perpetrator. So, that's, I think, been the largest profile of legal action against these publishers. And we've never, another question I saw kind of along the same lines is, we have not faced any legal consequences up to this point, at least not that I've been aware of, and I would probably be made aware of it. We are very careful about listing the public, like very careful. We've met some of our journal evaluators, so we are very thorough, and really for that reason, we are listing these publishers as predatory. We review individual journals, also not publishers, but we are very careful, and they've earned their way onto our predatory reports database, so to speak. So yeah, we have not faced any legal consequences yet for doing so, mainly because we, again, are careful, and these operations are deceptive. We're very careful to not include low quality journals, newer journals, journals from developing countries, things of that nature. So it's not been an issue for us.
Great, thanks, Mike. Let's see. There was a question specifically about Cabells from Lisa, who asked, how often do you update your criteria for identifying / evaluating predatory titles? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can speak to that. So we actually currently are criteria, predatory evaluation criteria, which again are available at cabells.com. One of the top links, I believe, sorry, I don't know the exact link. I don't want to look, but they're at cabells.com. It's a very easily navigable website. Those are currently undergoing a revision right now. We hope to have version 2.0. We currently have version 1.1 posted. So version 2.0, I think that's what we're going to call it, should be up within the next few months. I'm not working on it, so I don't want to promise any deadlines, but they're in progress. So in the coming months, I would say we should see an updated list of criteria. There are, again, I saw a question relating to AI. There are always new technology, which kind of makes launching and operating these types of publications easier. So we do constantly monitor the landscape and take new tools such as AI into account. So we're constantly always, considering our criteria, and I think certainly within this calendar year, we should expect to see our newest set of valuation criteria posted.
Great. Okay. Another question about Cabells specifically from Nina, who asked, how would a journal learn that they've been listed as predatory? They notified, or I think you all mentioned this early on.
So I don't want to speak out of school, if that's the right expression. We do not currently notify journals when they are included. If I'm incorrect about this, I don't believe we notify them. Again, the main reason is, they're really knowingly, intentionally operating a fraudulent operation. And we we are very confident in our evaluations and our inclusion in predatory reports. We don't take action to notify them. We do have an appeals process in place. Any journal listed, if they do get, presumably this should, they should find out through reduced submissions, you would hope, or there would be some indication to them. They are able to request an appeal of their inclusion. Once per calendar year, we will do a reevaluation. I don't believe we have had any successful appeals to this point, mainly because these journals, unfortunately, are not using our tools as a kind of roadmap toward legitimacy. We would love them to use the things we've found and to kind of clean up their act. And if not, rise to the level of inclusion in journalytics, we would certainly love to remove them from predatory reports. As I mentioned, we have not had any successful appeals yet. It doesn't seem to be in their plans to use our tool as kind of a way to be more legitimate, but plainly.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Let's see, we have a couple more minutes left. There was a question from Robert that came in, who asked, how do you see preprint servers affecting the publishing process, especially for article preservation? So just preprints affecting the push toward preprints. I think this is in reference to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation push for preprints affecting predatory journal practices. Sort of an open-ended question.
I would say preprint papers have an important place in many fields. However, we do not take a look at preprints. We focus on journals that claim to be peer-reviewed, and so these are, established journals. We do not look at preprint servers.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Okay, and there's a question from Dave who asked, what would be your best advice for a not yet started open access journal to avoid looking like a predatory journal?
I think the focus would be, don't just try to make it your goal to not look like a predatory journal. Don't act like a predatory journal. We have criteria on our website that is freely available for you to take a look at, that talks about the ways in which we identify predatory behaviors. And if you're a new journal starting up, if you make sure that you are not actually doing any of those things, not just trying to avoid looking like you do them, but if you're not actually doing them, then you don't have to worry about people like us taking a look at your journal and saying, that's predatory. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Great, thank you. Okay, maybe time for one more. There's a question that asked, predatory journals often claim adherence to COPE guidelines, possibly as a token of legitimacy. How can this practice be counteracted? And I think, Mike, you talked about COPE guidelines being helpful. So maybe you could take this one.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, we find this, this often, as you mentioned, journals claiming indexing in not, or following COPE guidelines, also claiming indexing in Cabells. Very often they are indexing Cabells just on the predatory side, not the journalytic side. I think the best thing, as we mentioned, is just to become familiar as you can with, and there are, again, many freely available resources such as COPE. Becoming as familiar as possible with their guidelines when looking at a predatory journal's website. It's usually, I'd say, not always apparent where they are not. A lot of times they're claiming things that are just too good to be true. Or, it's clear despite the guy, if you actually look at the COPE guidelines next to their journal's website, it oftentimes, at least, there is enough of a red flag where it's clear they're not really following the COPE guidelines, or they're kind of trying to make it seem like they are. So, studying, or becoming familiar with these guidelines and then comparing it to the journal's website is really a great first step.
Okay, awesome, great. So we're right at the end of the hour, so I'll just say thanks so much to Ashley, Yasmin, Ruth, and Mike for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you so much to our attendees for your questions and your comments. We really appreciate your engagement. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording and where to access today's slides. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again in the near future on another session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.